tertiary colours, the colour wheel itself and the colour schemes that can be created from it. And then we'll sort of delve into how some colours work together. But while we're doing it, please pop any questions that you do have into the feed, because I've got many screens here. There's lots of moving parts within this space, and I'm certainly here to answer all of your questions. So use it as an opportunity to have a voice. But there is one thing: if you do have any images or photos of a space that you would like me to have a look at, if you can hold off on the images until we finish streaming, because while we're live, it's unfortunately you're not able to upload images, but you can upload as many questions as you like. Okay, so I'm going to start. So, frequently asked question: what colours go with what, or how do I know? You know, like I've got this colour, I've got green, for example. How do I know what colours are going to work with it? So we are going to look at the colour wheel. So I'm going to share quite a few little images that I've put together for today's session. So I will pop my iPad on the screen and I will pop myself up in the corner. Okay, so let's begin. So there's a fantastic tool out there called a colour wheel. And the first colour wheel was designed, or created, if you like, by Sir Isaac Newton many moons ago. And from that to what we have now, it really has evolved. And there's a lot of terminology that now exists with a colour wheel itself. And there's lots of things out there that can help you at home to create a fantastic space, because that's what these sessions are all about. We like to give you a little bit of confidence when we're talking about colour. So as you can see on the screen there, you've got your primary colours. So your primary colours, there's three colours, obviously. There's blue, red and yellow. And these colours mix together to create your secondary colours and also help to create tertiary colours. So primary, secondary colours are created from mixing two primary. As you can see from there, if you're mixing a red and a yellow, you're going to be given an orange. And then our tertiary colours, so mixing a primary like blue, a secondary like green, it's going to create a beautiful blue-green colour. So you're probably wondering, okay, so how does that apply to me? Very good question. So they're the colours that create a colour wheel per se, as you can see on the screen there. And from that, we start to create some beautiful colour schemes. So we're going to explore just a little bit further. Now, when we talk about colours, colours can be broken up, and I get asked this quite a lot as well, you know, working cool colours, warm colours, etc. So you can group them, as you can see. So the colour will kind of get split in half. You have warm colours and then you have cool colours. So when we start to talk about colour within a space, you can use colour, I'm just moving one of my screens, you can use colour to create illusions, if you like. So for example, warm colours advance and cool colours can visually recede. So if you've got a small space and you want to make it appear bigger, you can use a cool colour. And if you've got a rather large space and you want it to bring it in, you can use a warm colour. Now, this is where you can use a colour wheel to, I guess, start to create colour schemes and know that the colour schemes are designed to work. So the first one, and this is so easy to use, it's using what they call a complementary colour scheme. So it's looking at two colours on the colour wheel that are opposite each other. Now they are designed to work really well together. Then you have what's called a split complementary. So you look at opposites on the colour wheel again, but then on the bottom colour you can split, you go either side. So for example there you've got red, then you've got blue-green, and then you have yellow-green. Then you've also got triadic, so you can see that equally spaced around the colour wheel you can select three colours. Not only that, you've got analogous colour scheme, and I love this. It's using the three colours that sit together around a colour wheel, and they work extremely well. Look, it's not limited to the three colours that I've highlighted there. This is just purely for an example. Then you have a tetradic, or sometimes referred to as a double complementary, and that's a rectangular version there. And then you also have the same type of thing, but we're using a square version there as well. So once you've established a color scheme that you want to work from. So, you know, you might think, okay, and I'm going to keep it really, really simple tonight, because as you can see on the screen, I'm going to use a complementary. So we're going to look at red and green. And you're probably thinking, oh, red and green together, you know, it reminds me of Christmas. Now, the reason I've picked red and green, because green is trending. And we are seeing a lot of green being used in interiors, green being used for kitchens, green being used for, you know, all over, saturating a space in just one color, and it looks fabulous. And I must admit, I am quite partial to green myself. So the opposite to green is red, but it's when you start to play with what's known as tint, tone, and shade, you can start to find yourself some beautiful color palettes and beautiful colors that work together really, really well. And so as you can see, let's have a look at the red, for example. The top is like the pure color, so we've called it a hue, and then the tint is the pure color mixed with white, which creates a softer tone, or a softer color, sorry. Then your tone is the pure color plus gray, which creates tone. And then you've got your pure color plus black, which creates shade. So you can see how by adding other colors, you're diluting your color down or you're intensifying the color. So you're starting to create some beautiful, beautiful colors. And I must admit, when I'm working with colors, I tend to look towards colors that have a lot of tone in them. I do like to work with colors that have sort of a slight grayness to them. I think they work really, really well. I find them to be extremely timeless. So that's the basics. So that's working with a complementary. But you could, as I've just shown you, you could use any of the other color schemes. You could do a split complementary, analogous, etc. And you can start to play with like the tint, tone, and shade. Now I want to show you here, and this is a really, really popular color scheme, if you like, and it works extremely well. It's what's known as a monochromatic color scheme. So again, it's using a pure color or a hue, as I've called it there, and then you've got your tint, tone, and shade, and we're starting to play around with the colors. So for example, the first two circles on the screen there next to the triangle, if you like, so you've got two tints, if you like. So you've got two variants, so varying degrees of white. And then the next one, you've got tone, so two colors that have varying degrees of gray added. So you're creating quite a few different variances. And then obviously going into the darker tones there where you've got shade. So it shows you how you can create a beautiful color scheme using one color per se, but playing around with the tint, tone, and shade. Now, working opposites on the color wheel, as I showed you before, and I'm talking about a split complement. Talking about a complementary, not a split. So using two colors that are opposite on the color wheel. Here, I've put them on the screen. I've played around again with the tint, tone, and shade, and then I have, as you can see, there are two circles, one pink, one green, with two arrows pointing to the tone. So they're colors that have basically, you know, you've got a green and you've got a red, and we've added some tone to the color, and there's two beautiful, beautiful colors that work extremely well together. And then on the other side, we've got two, again, a pink and a green, but this time around it has tint, so white added. So it's more of a pastel with a soft, a little bit more brightness to it. Beautiful colors that work extremely well together. So that just shows you, I'm going to come back on screen now. That shows you how easy it is to create or to create your own color scheme, but also to work out how colors work together. So my suggestion to you is when you are embarking on a project and you're about to start looking, let's say, for example, you're going to paint your kitchen. You love the layout of your kitchen, you want to refresh it, so you're going to paint the cabinetry, you're going to paint your walls, etc. And you love green. So using a color wheel, working out what other colors can sit with green, and then playing around with the tint, tone, and shade, you can achieve a beautiful color scheme or a beautiful color palette very easily. So before you embark on your project and you're going down to get your paint, do have a look at a colour wheel. Look, you'll find them everywhere. You know, you can Google a colour wheel. It will show you the basics of what sits opposite, and then you can start to play around and have a feel for what you think you're going to want to put within your space. It is very, very easy. What I also do suggest though is make sure when you are trialing colour to sample pot. So get yourself a sample pot, a tester of your colour. I think it's really, really important because we talk about this every night, or every Thursday night I should say. I probably talk about it every night, but every Thursday night we talk about the importance of trialing your colour, because when you put colour into your space, and last week we focused on this, we focused on lighting, how lighting can affect your colour. It's really important when it goes into your space, trial it, test it to ensure that it's going to work for you, because things like your lighting, things like depending on what you have for your flooring, your window furnishings, and even your furniture, etc., can influence and affect your overall colour. So there's just a few tips there. So that's very, very easy. I'm happy to pop some of these slides into the chat once we finish streaming. So if you're wanting to learn a little bit more about colour schemes, you can have a look here. It's going to help you, guide you with what works with what. So let me see if we have any questions, and then I can continue on and talk a little bit more. Where are we? I do have a question. Let me just see. Okay. Tony, thank you very much for joining our session. So you have said that we are doing a complete house makeover and would like to have recommendations for a modern country farmhouse style. I'm hoping for bright and light with splashes of colour. Okay, Tony, so I can give you lots of colour suggestions. If you're wanting light and bright, I'm presuming, are we talking inside? That's probably something that I do need to know. I'll presume we are for this. Light and bright, I can give you some fantastic, beautiful whites. And when we talk about farmhouse, I know I've had a lot of people talking about doing farmhouse style interiors, and they do use, as I've just talked about, green. They are using particular deeper toned greens. So we do have, and I'm going to go to a couple of greens that I think would really work for a farmhouse feel. So we have a couple here. So the first one is Tanura green, and then also birch forest. So depending on the style of green that you like. So I'm going to, if all goes well, pop this up to the camera, and I'll even share my screen afterwards and show you. So we do have, so it's those two greens here. So that one is birch forest and the other one is Tanura green. So they are fantastic colours to work with beautiful whites to create that farmhouse feel. And if you are using a lot of timber for the farmhouse look, they work extremely well. So let me just get the right fan deck here. So for some whites to keep it light and bright, that will work extremely well with the greens. Let me have a look. So I would suggest that you could, oh wow, there's so many whites. You could use brilliant white for your doors and trims, but you could also, depending on if you're open to having a little bit of colour, I'm thinking Alpine Snow sits beautifully with birch forest. And then you could team that with brilliant white, which would give you a fantastic colour scheme. So I'm going to hold that up, and I will, as I've said, pop them up onto the screen. We'll do a digital version soon. So I think these two work extremely well together. And the other one that I would recommend to go with the second green, which is the Tanura green, perhaps you could go slightly, you can still keeping it bright, but slightly warmer I think would work really, really well. And look, I will tell you that we are seeing a lot more warmth come into play at the moment for interiors. I think, you know, you've got lots of things trending, being the modern Mediterranean aesthetic, which tends to work with or it's tending to bring a warmer white into play, and I think they look fantastic. You could also use Princess Bling with Tenora Green, or we could even go, oh, that's quite beautiful as well. I'm going to hold that one up. There's another colour as well called Airstream, which is slightly on the warmer, but it does work extremely well. You can see the green in the background there with the white. Beautiful. And you could use, as I mentioned before, Taubmans Crisp White for your doors and trims, or Taubmans Brilliant White, and you would have a fantastic colour scheme. Okay, so hope that helps. Tony, please come back to us, and I'd be very happy to give you some more information, etc. And especially if you are also doing the exterior, I'd be happy to offer some help with colours there as well. Okay, hi Marlene, thank you for joining us this evening. What colour is behind me? I will just grab that on my fan deck and show you. It is a beautiful colour. It's a lovely grey, and it is called Foxdale, but I just want to see whether I can show you just a little swatch closer so that you can really see see the true form, if you like, because there's lots of lights and lots of things happening in here. Okie dokie. Here we go. There we go. Fantastic colour. You can see my fan deck's very well loved. There's the colour there called Foxdale. If you're talking about the overall wall colour, I do have a couple of other blobs up there, but yeah, the overall wall colour is Taubmans Foxdale. Okay, so it looks like we're going to have, looks like it could be a little bit of a quiet evening this evening, but that's okay. So the other thing I'm going to talk about, I have been asked quite a lot, and we talk about this every week. So for those that watch every week, I'll apologise in advance for repeating myself, but I think it's really, really important. So we are always asked about whites for interiors. And as you just heard me talking about talking about how we're starting to see whites slightly warm up. And that's due to, as I touched on a moment ago, the modern Mediterranean aesthetic. We're starting to see some fantastic whites come into play. However, you really need to, as I said before, sample them to ensure that it's going to work within your environment. Take into consideration your lighting, etc. Getting yourself a sample pot is the best way. But there's two areas that I recommend you trial. So when you're in Bunnings, go and see the Friendly Paint team and ask them whether you can have what's called a palette liner. So when our paint comes into store, it comes onto large pallets, and in between pallets there's large pieces of cardboard. So if you can acquire one of those, and if you can cut your piece of cardboard to 1 metre by 1 metre square. Now the reason I like to recommend using a large square of cardboard is it's going to allow you to really see how the colour is really going to work. Having a small sample is great just to, to have a visual, but you really want to trial it in a larger size. Now, brush 3 coats of your sample pot onto the piece of cardboard. I know we normally talk about our paints being a 2-coat system, especially if I'm talking about something like Endure or Easy Coat. But because we're using a piece of cardboard and we're not undercoating it first, I recommend doing 3 coats. Once dry, you're going to, I suggest, so here's your wall, here's your floor. Place the sample up against the wall so it's touching on the floor. And then looking at it at different times of day and also under natural light. As you know, natural light is the best light to view your colour. But also looking at it under artificial lighting so that you see how it works within your environment. Taking into consideration what's happening if you're getting a lot of reflection from your flooring, if the colour is starting to warm up, just so you have an understanding of how the colour is going to work. Now the second place to trial your colour, so you have your wall, you have your ceiling, is to trial it up the top here. So it's up the top of the wall, you know, pushed up against, so it's touching the ceiling. Now, put it there again, looking at it under natural light and also looking at it of an evening under artificial lighting, so you can see how the color is going to work, because looking at it in that sort of area, it really gives you a really good indication. So, and then there's no surprises, because I do know from talking to consumers all the time around about color, being at a color wall, and even from our online queries that we do receive, I know that, I'll be honest, some people get disappointed with how their white looks within their environment. And it's quite a common occurrence that a lady's friend down the road has a particular white and it looks fantastic. She's going to use that white within her own space and she doesn't like it. And you know, I've had that myself. Have been in love with a particular white, and I thought, right, I'm going to build my color palette around this white. And you know what? It looked fantastic in a couple of the rooms, but at this one house that we were doing up, we had quite a sunken lounge, and I could not get that white to work within that space. It looked, dare I say, it looked quite dirty and rather dull. So it's really important to trial the color within your space, within different areas, so that you understand how it's going to work. And then that way it ensures that you'll be satisfied with the end result, because it's really, really important. And especially if you're like me, you're a DIY and you love to get in and you love to paint, you know, and there's nothing better than finishing a project, standing back and going, you know what, I did that, it looks fantastic. And you want to be happy, because we know, you know, it's a labour of love when you're getting in there and you're painting and you're doing all of that sort of work. So we want you to be satisfied. So that is the best tip that I can give you, to trial your colour via a sample pot. You know what, you can, I think sample pots are very, very inexpensive, but it can save you so much stress, time and money in the end. So that's my biggest tip for everybody that's going to be doing a paint project this weekend. What else would I like to, what else? Do we have any other questions here? It does, Marlene, that's right. So going back to the colour that's behind me, Marlene's saying it just goes to show because it almost looks green or olive. Correct, it does. It has quite a greeny undertone, but here we are talking about how lighting can affect colour. So of a daytime, the backdrop that I have here looks completely different to what it does of an evening. You know, obviously I've got overhead lighting, I've got lighting in front of me, etc. So the colour becomes distorted. So really good opportunity to sample pot prior to doing it. I must admit I did. I'm quite happy with the backdrop. It really works well for what we need for this environment. Okay, hi Nicola, thank you very much for joining us. Hi, she says, a bit boring, never boring. We're always here for all of your questions and happy to answer anything. So a bit boring, I know, but needing all white advice, please. If I'm wanting to paint the whole house crisp white, including ceiling, doors and trims, should I do the ceiling half strength crisp white? Don't want the ceiling to look darker than the walls. That's a really, really good question. And to be honest, I'm going to say the amount of tint that goes into crisp white is not a huge amount. And crisp white is our number one white. If I could show you all of my other walls, they have crisp white. It is the most beautiful white. And what I love about crisp white is so whites are quite complex. When you stand there and you look at a colour wall and you look at the varying degrees of white, it can become quite overwhelming. And so what I recommend is, you know, getting a white piece of paper or a brilliant white colour chip from the Taubmans colour wall, and then putting your colour, when you're looking at whites, in front of it, then you can start to see the undertone. So the undertone of crisp white is a very, very soft, it's just got a very soft warmth to it. It has a tint in it that's called raw umber, which is, I'm going to say this, and it's probably not a very nice terminology, but it's a murky sort of browny tone. But what it does is it gives you the most beautiful white, a very soft white that works in all environments, that works when you have areas that lack light, areas that are absolutely drenched in natural sunlight. So it works in all areas. So for me, I have used crisp white on my ceiling, on my walls, on my doors and trims. So I have not diluted or, you know, made my crisp white half strength. I've kept it full strength because it is minimal tint. But you know, Nicola, you're very welcome to test a half strength version, as we've just talked about with sample pots. Get yourself a crisp white, ask for a half strength, and then you can have a look yourself, paint that piece of cardboard out and then lay it on your ceiling so you can see how the colour works for you. So when you're doing a colour scheme like this, which I think is fabulous, it's really important that you use the appropriate products. So using, for a ceiling, you're going to use a ceiling white, which is flat, or you can also use Taubmans Endure Matte. And then for your walls, you're going to use a low sheen or a matte, dependent on what you prefer. A matte's a fantastic sheen level to hide any imperfections, especially if you're doing up an older home, an old Queenslander, something that has long hallways, where, you know, the plaster's not 100% perfect. Certainly using a matte will hide those imperfections. And then when you're doing your doors and trims, because doors and trims do have a tendency to get knocked. I know in my house, we've got beautiful door handles, but they never get used. Everyone seems to just use the palm of their hand just to push the door. So you want to use a product that's going to be able to withstand all of the oils and the dirts that come off your hands. So it's not going to compromise the coating. And also the other thing to be really mindful of when you're doing an all over white scheme is to ensure that you use a product that's not going to yellow. So when you're talking about doors and trims, I always recommend using an enamel, because an enamel is extremely hard wearing. However, I would recommend using a water-based enamel because it's non-yellowing. So when you're doing that beautiful white, creating that wonderful white aesthetic, you're not going to end up with doors and trims that are looking golden, if you like, because that's what happens with a traditional oil-based paint. They tend to golden up. So I think it's what you're doing there, Nicola, is fantastic. Winning combination there. I've used it in my own home and I love it. And I think it's going to look spot on. But do, you know, if you're concerned, from my experience and from having sort of completed that project myself using those colours, I do know that crisp white full strength on my ceilings is fine. But as I said, if you're unsure, get yourself a sample pot, tinted to half strength, and have a look for yourself. I hope that helps. Please, Nicola, if you'd like some more advice, please pop something else into the feed and I'd be happy to answer any further questions. Okay. Hi, Michelle. Thank you very much for joining us. So you're saying, hi, I have a red terracotta roof with the aluminium window frames being black. What colours do you recommend for the gutter fascia eaves and window trim? Okay, so referring to our little mini masterclass that we had earlier tonight, which was all around creating colour schemes using a colour wheel. So when we're talking about a red terracotta roof, so the opposite to red is green. So I would recommend using a colour, I'm not saying green per se, but I'm saying using a colour that does tend to have a little bit of a green undertone, because we know it's going to work really, really well with terracotta roof tiles, and it's going to offset the black beautifully. So for the gutter fascia, eaves and window trim, so you could, depending on whether you want your gutter and fascia the same, I think you could, I mean, it depends on the style of your home as well. So I'm just imagining you could do the gutter and the fascia the same. And then I would also look to tie in the gutter and the fascia colour down into your window trim, because it's really nice when you're creating a colour scheme to look. I like to use the principles of design, and repetition is one of them. And I think when you're using a colour on above, for example, on your guttering and your fascia, it's nice to bring that colour down onto the rest of the dwelling. So using it on the window trim is going to create cohesion. And for the eaves, I'd recommend going lighter, because where your eaves sit, they don't receive any natural sunlight. So it's better to keep them light. So you really don't want to go dark. That's my advice anyhow. And I think majority of the time people tend to paint their eaves some type of white. So for knowing that we've got red or terracotta, and if you wanted to, for your guttering, if you're wanting to stick with ColourBond colours, you could use something like woodland grey. I think would work extremely well, and it would look quite nice as well with the black. Or you could even go, let me just think, if you wanted to go a little bit lighter. So I'm going to give you 3. So we're looking at the black here. The colour next to it is woodland grey. And then the colour after that is wallaby. So these are colour bond colours, and I think they work really, really well. And when you tie them in with a terracotta, let me just see. So a terracotta going into a red, depending on, so I'm going to hold up something. I'm going to hold up a couple of colours, depending on the tone of your terracotta. Let's get rid of those. And I'll just pop these up just to give you a feel for how they all work together. So you can start to see those colours sit really, really well together, what I've put to work with terracotta red toned roof tiles. And then for a white, again, I'd be looking at a white that has a bit of a neutral element. And as I was talking about before, white's being very complex. There's lots of different tints that go into create the beautiful undertones that exist within the whites. But picking something that's neutral, so you've got a cool white, warm white, and a neutral. So you've got a cool white that tends to throw more blue. You've got a warm white that tends to throw, you could almost say more of a warm yellowy undertone. So going into those creams, sort of, and almost going over to sort of beige undertones. And then you've got a neutral, and a neutral tends to have more of a green undertone. And again, because I've picked for you woodland grey and also wallaby, I'm thinking that a neutral is going to work really, really well. And given that we're going outside, it's nice to have when we talk about whites, having a white that has a little bit of undertone or a little bit of tint to it, so to speak, so that you're not going to get a lot of glare. Having said this, we know we're talking about eaves, so we're not going to have direct sunlight on them. However, so I'm thinking something like Taubmans South Pole would work really, really well. And let me just see if I can find it. And then I think I may have to get off. We've gone over time. Sorry, everybody. I could possibly answer one more question. Here we go. South Pole, finally. Actually, no, we could even go a little bit darker. There's a colour you could go. Okay, so we could go Taubmans South Pole, or we could go grey matter. So I'll hold those up. Okay, let's have a look. Okay, so the top one is South Pole and the bottom one is grey matter, but either one of those are going to work extremely well for your eaves to work with either wallaby or woodland grey. Okay, Michelle, I hope that helps you. If you do have any more queries, please pop something into the feed and I'll be very happy to come back to you. Okay, so, hi Annie, how are you this evening? Thank you very much for joining us. So you're doing a new build, fantastic, and congratulations. It's very, very exciting. But you don't know where to start with exterior and interior colours, but you're set on surf mist roof. Fantastic. So when you're doing a new build, I always, when I'm out consulting, I recommend to my clients to have a look around and decide whether you like a light roof or a dark roof, because we need a starting point. But it's fantastic. We have a starting point here for surf mist. That's wonderful. Okay, so from that, we can build you a beautiful colour scheme. So I'm going to ask you whether you're looking at, so the style of your home, I think that comes into play with the colours that we pick, where you set. So are you set in bush, are you coastal, etc.? And what's the overall feel that you're wanting? So if you, perhaps you've got a vision in mind, I know, for example, I'll reference Hamptons because everybody is in love with Hamptons and it's a beautiful aesthetic. You know, you're looking at beautiful blue greys going into deeper blues, deeper greys, and then going into sort of softer whites. So if you can let me know a little bit more, I would be very happy to help you with an exterior scheme. Now for interior, it's fantastic to look at, there's a few things. So the colour of your window is also going to help to influence the wall colour that you select. So that's one point, one touch point. But it's also too, it's things like the colour of your kitchen joinery, a colour of your flooring or tile, etc. So that helps to create, I suppose, you know, that overall feel that you're after. So there's a couple of things there. Okay, so you've come back to me. You're after a bushland setting. Fantastic. So my next question to you is, are we going light or dark? What's the substrate? So what is the external? Is it cladding? Is it weatherboard? Do you have any brick, etc.? Just so I can build a visual in my head, which can help then to create a colour palette for you. Oh, beautiful. Okay, bushland setting on Sunshine Coast. That's where I'm based, on the sunny coast. I'm thinking white for doors and windows. Okay, fantastic. So if you're thinking whites for doors and windows, and we're going for surf mist, I'm thinking of going perhaps letting you have a look at some beautiful soft greys. Now, when I talk about grey, we can categorise grey into 4 categories. So you've got a blue-based grey, you have a red-based grey, then you have a greyish, so that's a brown-based grey, and then we have what's called a neutral. It's a green-based grey. So something that has that slight green undertone, I think, could work beautifully. Okay, so you've got cladding and mostly render. Okay, I am going to give you a couple of suggestions, and then I'm going to take this offline and help to build a colour scheme for you because we are completely out of time. So actually I'll take it offline. Annie, thank you. Don't go away because I will pop into the feed and then start to shoot you some colour suggestions, etc. And then I'd be happy to talk to you further as well about your interior. Okay, so we do have some other questions there. I'm getting a heap of questions coming in, which is fantastic. What I'll do is stop being in front of the camera and then go behind the scenes and answer everyone's questions. So I'm going to say thank you very much to everybody for joining us this evening. It's been fantastic to have you with us. I'm loving all the questions. That's great. I'll sit back here for the next half an hour until we answer them all. No worries at all. And also to let you know, next week is a very special Taubmans live colour advice session. We do have some special guests, so make sure that you stay tuned to our notifications and to our Facebook, and you'll see who we have coming next week. Very, very exciting. And also I talked about this last week, but I think about 3 weeks ago we had a wonderful session with James Treble. He is fantastic. So if you haven't watched it, I'd suggest go back and have a look. He is amazing when he talks about colour, and he shares a lot of design and colour tips for everybody out there. And we also conducted a Taubmans live colour advice session from our Colorsmith studio at Clifton Hill in Victoria. And I'm wanting to bring that to life again because if you do live in Victoria and you would like to have an in-person colour consultancy, our wonderful resident interior designer Charlotte is working from Clifton Hill, and you can certainly book to have a colour consultation there. So I will make sure we pop some details into the feed as well. So thank you very much everybody for joining us this evening. It's been fantastic. Don't go away. I will make sure that I answer all of your questions for you. And until then, we hope to see you here again next week. And until then, everybody, happy painting. Good night. Bye.